Hello, and welcome to Dissecting Philosophy with Dr McDonald. In this episode, I'll be discussing the sections in Nietzsche's Zarathustra of the way of the Creator and of old and young women. I'll also have a brief discussion of the films Lego Movie, Pretty Woman, and Legally Blonde to accompany the discussion. So let's get cracking on. Of the way of the Creator. My brother, do you want to go apart and be alone? Do you want to seek the way to yourself? Pause just a moment and listen to me. He who seeks may easily get lost himself. It is a crime to go apart and be alone. Thus speaks the herd. The voice of the herd will still ring within you. And when you say, we have no longer the same conscience, you and I, it will be a lament and a grief. For see, it is still the same conscience that causes your grief. It is the last glimmer of this conscience that still glows in your affliction. But you want to go the way of your affliction, which is the way to yourself? If so, show me your strength for it, and your right to it. Are you a new strength and a new right, a first motion, a self-propelling wheel? Can you also compel stars to revolve about you? Alas, there is so much lusting for eminence, there is so much convulsion of the ambitious. Show me that you are not one of the lustful or ambitious. Alas, there are so many great ideas that do no more than a bellows. They inflate and make emptier. There are so many great ideas that do no more than a bellows. They inflate and make emptier. Do you call yourself free? I want to hear your ruling idea, and not that you have escaped from a yoke. Are you a man as ought to escape a yoke? There are many who threw off their final worth when they threw off their bondage. Free from what? Zarathustra does not care about that. But your eye should clearly tell me free for what? Can you furnish yourself with your own good and evil, and hang up your own will above yourself as a law? Can you be a judge of yourself and an avenger of your law? It is terrible to be alone, but the judge and avenger of one's own law is to be like a star thrown forth into empty space and into the icy breath of solitude. Today you still suffer from the many, O man, set apart. Today you still have your courage whole and your hopes. But one day your solitude will make you weary. One day your pride will bend and your courage break. One day you will cry, I am alone. One day you will no longer see what is exalted in you and what is base in you. You will see all too closely. Your sublimity itself will make you afraid, as if it were a phantom. One day you will cry, everything is false. There are many emotions that seek to kill the solitary. If they do not succeed, well, they must die themselves. But are you capable of being a murderer? My brother, have you ever known the word contempt, and the anguish of your justice in being just to those who despise you? You compel many to change their opinion about you. They hold that very much against you. You approached them, and yet went on past them, that they will never forgive you. You go above and beyond them, but the higher you climb, the smaller you appear to the eye of envy, and he who flies is hated most of all. So this section is building upon the previous section that we've discussed of the flies of the marketplace, where in that section Nietzsche argues that the creative individual should flee basically into their solitude, away from herd mentality, because everybody else will bring them down. And so in order to be a creative individual is to have your own space away from everybody and allow for that creativity to flourish in that space. And in this section, we have the whole idea in your own space and being creative, and the problems with that starting to emerge. We have the creative individual at the start here you and I no longer share the same conscience. And so it's that sense of when somebody starts to develop their own opinions, develop their own ideas, they want to move away from the norm, move away from what's been said is correct to them, start to develop an alternative, and in doing so there's that clash. I am no longer what you say of me. I no longer fit in these norms, but rather I'm going to create something, and creation itself is going to challenge how we think about things and reevaluate and restructure our own opinions. But in doing so, there's that sense of grief and lament and loss that Nietzsche has here. Once you challenge these norms, you make yourself an outsider in a way. And in becoming an outsider, you have that sort of wanting to then reflect upon exactly what you have lost in the first place. And the challenge to your own idea there is to not just suddenly go back into readoption of the norms and the values that's been placed upon you because you miss them so much. Do you have the strength, he says, basically? Are you that first motion? Are you that self-propelling wheel to no longer lust, basically, back in for all that comfort, back in for all the everydayness? But when you do break out, when you do make yourself an outsider in a way by not agreeing with the norms and wanting to create your own way of thinking about things, then Nietzsche talks about the egoism of all that, of course. Everybody lusts for eminence, in the sense of everybody lusts for fame, to be ambitious, and therefore just by making oneself an outsider, you then have, at the same time, he says, this whole sort of egoism of people wanting to be then better than everyone else. But that's the problem as well, he says. We don't want to end up in a situation where you have basically this massive egotistical Napoleonic complex, as they say, where you think you're completely right and everybody else should just follow what you say because you know better than what they do. And what's interesting as well is that line of, can you furnish yourself with your own good and evil and hang up your own will above yourself as a law? Can you be the judge of yourself and avenger of your law? In a sense of, if you're going to create something, and we have in relation to ethics here, a new moral idea about what's good, well, is it actually going to work in the sense of, can you yourself uphold it as a law? Is that going to work? Can you also be critical and judgmental of your own self and also avenger of yourself at the same time? So it's in the sense of not only having the idea and conviction in the first place of whatever is being created, but also being judgmental about yourself, critical about what you're doing, and then also that enabling a very healthy approach to what you're doing. And it's that critical approach to one's own work that you then can become increasingly judgmental about yourself in the negative as well, of everything that you do is not good enough. But I think it's in the sense here of just having that little pinch of, maybe I could do this a little bit better here. Just taking those few moments just to have those brief reflection upon what you do. And of course that ultimately leads to a much better, whatever it is, product that's being created, idea that's being created, and so forth. Because you ultimately challenge that own egoism within yourself. You no longer have that Napoleonic complex about everything you do is absolutely right because of that moment of critical reflection. Continuing on then, how could you be just towards me? That is how you must speak. I choose your injustice is my portion. They throw injustice and dirt at the solitary, but, my brother, if you want to be a star, you must shine nonetheless brighter for them on that account, and be on your guard against the good and just. They would like to crucify those who devise their own virtue. They hate the solitary. Be on your guard too against holy simplicity. Everything which is not simple is unholy to it, and it too likes to play with fire, in this case the fire of the stake. And be on your guard too against the assaults your love makes upon you. The solitary extends his hand too quickly to anyone he meets. To many men you ought not to give your hand, but only your paw, and I should like it if your paw had claws too. But you yourself will always be the worst enemy you can encounter. You yourself lie in wait for yourself in caves and forests. Solitary man, are you going the way to yourself? And your way leads past yourself and your 7 devils. You will be a heretic to yourself, and a witch, and a prophet, and an evildoer, and a villain. You must be ready to burn yourself in your own flame. How can you become new if you had not first become ashes? Solitary man, you are going the way of the Creator. You want to create yourself a god from your 7 devils. Solitary man, you are going the way of the lover. You love yourself, and for that reason you despise yourself as only lovers can despise. The lover wants to create because he despises. What does he know of love who has not had to despise precisely what he loved? Go apart and be alone with your love and your creating, my brother, and justice will be slow to limp after you. Go apart and be alone with my tears, my brother. I love him who wants to create beyond himself, and thus perishes. Thus spoke Zarathustra. And so we have the sense of the herd mentality come back in here as well, as Nietzsche's really getting at that people hate those who they see fly above them, as he says, in the sense of extremely creative individuals who create absolutely fantastic things and are free to do so within their own space. There's that everyday sort of envy and wanting to also have that freedom to create like another person who's the very capability to do so. But as Nietzsche says as well, come back to the previous point, that when it comes to creating things, we're our own worst enemy, and we'll basically beat ourselves up, get incredibly depressed, and be incredibly critical about ourselves to the point that we're burning ourselves at the stake, he says, and we'll become our own villain in a way. But it's not to forget about the point as well about why we create in the first place, he says. Why do we create is because we love, and love is at the heart of all creative processes and all creative acts. In this very simple, easy example as well, if you love painting, that love is going to be manifest. If you love creating dresses and things to do with fashion, that's going to be all there. You need to be able to love what you do in order to be able to create. And it's that sense of, because we love it so much, because we get so intensely passionate, almost as much as we get intensely passionate about a relationship and another person at times, that we want so much out of it, that we want it to be absolutely the best that it can possibly be, in order for everybody else to see how much we've precisely put into it as work, and also how much we've adore exactly what we're doing. We want others to sort of share in our love at the same time. And that's also where you get the clash, of course, because let's say you can incredibly love a certain type of painting and doing artwork, let's say it's abstract painting, and then you're very intensely passionate about it. You produce these beautiful abstract paintings, and then when you put it on display, of course, you want everybody to then also adore and love how much passion you've created. But then comes the cutoff point as well, because not everybody's going to be attracted to that, and not everybody's going to find it great. They'll find maybe pop art great, or maybe they like sculpture, or maybe they just don't like art whatsoever, and so on. And that's when you can feel, of course, really dejected as well, and really just kicking the genital regions, is a polite way of putting it, in the sense of you put all this passion and all this work into it, and yet nobody loves it the way that you do. And of course, this is what's great about, let's say, cult films as well. Films that are at a given time period are completely panned by critics and so forth and don't really do well at the cinema, but then later, of course, becomes a big cult phenomenon and has great following and so forth. It's in the same sense of here, because the creative process includes love within it, and as long as somebody's incredibly passionate and adores exactly what they do, you'll find other people that adore and love and can feel all that passion come precisely off of what you've done in the first place. And it ends greatly on that line that sort of repeats itself a few times as we've went through. Go apart and be alone with my tears, my brother. I love him who wants to create beyond himself and thus perishes. It's always that ticking time clock Nietzsche puts on things as well. That bittersweet moment of, yes, it's fantastic. Yes, it could be amazing. It might be completely changing the entire game for how a thing's done, but it's always bittersweet in the sense of it will perish at some point, that another thing will come along, and and it always cuts it in the sense off of ever having the grandiose, of course, of being timeless and eternal and so forth. Nietzsche's always in the sense of here, no, it's going to perish, and isn't that a good thing? And of course it's a good thing as well, because we always allow for things to come along and completely demolish things in a very healthy and productive way, and allow all those new things to come out and new creative things to happen. We don't want to just completely uphold previous ideas, previous things, techniques and so forth. We want to continually be on a forward trajectory. So a great movie I thought to discuss about creativity is the Lego movie from 2014, which is a fantastic little children's animated movie. So let's read a little bit of the plot from Wikipedia and then have a nice little chat about Lego movie. In the Lego universe, populated by anthropomorphic minifigures, the evil Lord Business steals a super weapon named the Kraggle. A wizard named Vitruvius attempts to stop him, but is blinded by Business's robots, and prophesizes that the Special, an unknown hero, will find the piece of resistance capable of stopping the Kraggle. 8.5 years later, in the city of Bricksburg, ordinary construction worker Emmett Burkowski notices a mysterious woman at his construction site. Emmett falls into a hole and finds the piece of resistance. Compelled to touch it, Emmett experiences vivid visions and passes out. When he awakens with a piece of resistance attached to his back, in the custody of good cop, bad cop, Lord Business's lieutenant. The mysterious woman, Wildstyle, rescues Emmett, believing him to be the Special, and takes him to Vitruvius in the Old West. Emmett learns Wildstyle and Vitruvius are master builders, capable of building anything from the imagination without instructions. Wildstyle explains that Business wants to use the Kraggle, which is a tube of crazy glue with a weathered label, to freeze the world into orderly perfection. Though disappointed to find Emmett is not a master builder, Wildstyle and Vitruvius are convinced of his potential when he recalls visions of a seemingly human deity referred to as the man upstairs. So that's enough of the plot for us to have a little discussion about it. So what's great about the movie as well, it builds on the whole Lego idea of building towards the instructions. So whenever you buy a box of Lego, you're obviously presented with all the bits and bobs, and it's all nice and ordered and labelled and so forth. And then you have the set of instructions, and through a very slow and methodical detail and process, you slowly build up whatever it is you've bought. Lovely jubbly. And so what the movie has is all that loveliness of building Lego and construction and so forth through Emmett himself as a little construction worker, which is sort of a metaphor for how everyone builds Legos from the instructions. And then we have a moment in the film as well where Emmett becomes sort of lost in the real world, in which he finds himself being played with by the child who's actually making up the story that we're seeing. Bit of a fourth wall break that happens in the movie. And then we see that Lord Business, the bad character who wants to glue everything together and ultimately keep it absolutely the way that it is through the super glue, has actually been his father, who's played by Will Ferrell's character. So we have that lovely sort of clash and tension that's sort of built up in the movie between adhering to the instructions completely verbatim and then allowing for your own creativity to take place, and then sort of just throw the instructions out the window and just use all the pieces and bits and bobs how you will and merge everything together that's not meant to go together, such as having the cowboys play with the space guys and so on and so forth. But also what's happening on a deeper creative level as well, it's saying, well, in order to be creative individuals is ultimately to throw those instructions away, is to ultimately then start to build your own ideas from what's given to you. And then you, of course, have all that loveliness we've just talked about for the Nietzsche, the sort of like panic and loss of, oh no, now I can't build whatever it is, spaceship, let's say. But then you think, well, actually, I could build something really cool. Actually, I've got a good idea for it. Let's do it. And what's great as well is there's a whole Lego community that builds absolutely just mind-blowingly fantastic things. And from all that, they do that without instructions and completely through their own ideas they've generated about how they want to do it. And so it's sort of saying, on the one hand, yes, there is the instructions, but really it's still absolutely free for everybody to go and do it themselves. And from doing it yourself as well, we have all that loveliness about creativity, individuality, personality of everybody all coming through in just building whatever you'd like through the Lego blocks. And of course you have all those challenges, difficulty, finding the right parts that you need, the whole hurdles you need to get over. I've seen a very fantastic contraption that somebody built. It was basically the start of Indiana Jones Raiders of the Lost Ark, completely just from Lego pieces, and it's very technical little contraption that was made where the boulder run down and then went back up and around and so forth and back down. But the amount of time as well, the guy said, it took him absolutely hours to get into exactly how to make that work correctly, especially the fact that since Lego pieces are square. And then finally, what do you have at the end of it? A product of basically somebody's love, time, and passion. Moving on to the next section then, of Old and Young Woman. Before I start reading this section and discussing it, I would like to add this section is quite sexist in some things that it does say about women, but let's read through it and take Nietzsche to task for some of the things that he does say and be critical of what he says. So let's start. Why do you slink so shyly through the twilight, Zarathustra? And what are you hiding so carefully under your cloak? Is it a treasure someone has given you, or a child that has been born to you? Or are you now taking the way of thieves yourself, friend of the wicked? Truly, my brother, said Zarathustra, it is a treasure that has been given to me. It is a little truth that I carry, but it is as unruly as a little child, and if I do not stop its mouth, it will cry too loudly. Today, as I was going my way alone, at the hour when the sun sets, a little old woman encountered me and spoke thus to my soul. Zarathustra has spoken much to us women, too, but he has never spoken to us about women. And I answered her, one should speak about women only to men. Speak to me, too, of women, she said. I am old enough soon to forget it. And I obliged the little old woman, and spoke to her thus: Everything about woman is a riddle, and everything about woman has one solution. It is called pregnancy. For the woman, the man is a means. The end is always the child. But what is the woman for the man? The true man wants two things, danger and play. For that reason he wants woman as the most dangerous plaything. Man should be trained for war, and woman for the recreation of the warrior. All else is folly. The warrior does not like fruit that is too sweet. Therefore he likes woman. Even the sweetest woman is still bitter. So Nietzsche then touches upon the initial reason why men and women get together in the first place, in order to have children, and that is the main reason for a woman's attraction to men, Nietzsche's arguing, in order to produce a child at the end of it. And what men want in women is ultimately a dangerous plaything that they can have their way with. But we also can be incredibly critical of this line, everything about women is a riddle and everything about women has one solution, it's called pregnancy, in the sense of, well, what is exactly this saying on a deeper level, that women are promiscuous, frivolous, and so forth, and what does pregnancy ultimately allow for is for care and responsibility to take place, and therefore you no longer just become promiscuous and frivolous and so forth with your life. But is that solely limited just to women? No. Is it solely just limited to pregnancy? No, because we can do it in other different ideas. Doctors, regardless of what gender, has to have a sense of care and responsibility for another person. And even in a 9-to-5 job, regardless of gender, there is also the sense of care and responsibility, and that enables someone to have a much more structured lifestyle. But we also can say here, on the other hand, for men's view of women is very objective here, that we don't have basically a male respecting a female and her personality and exactly what she brings to the table. All that we have is just a dangerous plaything in the sense of just solely appreciating a woman for her looks or her beauty, and not the fact that she's potentially whatever profession or whatever job that she does as well, or the fact that she's a mother, and so on. So at the same time, we have this sense of being critical of men's objectification of women. Continuing on then, woman understands children better than a man, but man is more childlike than woman. A child is concealed in the true man. It wants to play. Come, woman, discover the child in man. Let woman be a plaything, pure and fine like a precious stone, illumined by the virtues of a world that does not yet exist. Let the flash of a star glitter in your love. Let your hope be, may I bear the Superman. Let there be bravery in your love. With your love you should attack him who inspires you with fear. Let your honor be in your love. Woman has understood little otherwise about honor, but let this be your honor, always to love more than you are loved, and never to be second in this. Let man fear woman when she loves. Then she bears every sacrifice, and every other thing she accounts valueless. Let man fear woman when she hates, for man is at the bottom of his soul only wicked, but woman is base. So in this section then, we almost have Nietzsche saying women have a very special relationship with men in the sense of they're able to bring out that childlike nature and childlike quality in men. And it's to get away from the sort of stereotypical rational man who's stuck about his own midst and his own way of doing things, and woman is much more an idea of a free spirit, able to open up man to different possibilities and different ways of thinking. Or there was that great wee TV show that was on as well, Dharma and Greg, in which you had Greg is the man very much stuck in the 9-to-5 everydayness of his own life, and then of course you had Dharma as very much free-spirited woman and all the lovely clash and conflict that happens between those two different types of personalities. And it's also in the sense here that woman loves with much greater passion and intensity than what men do. It's that great wee line, let man fear woman when she loves, then she bears every sacrifice and every other thing she accounts valueless. That means to say that when you put your complete heart and soul into it, everything else is just completely thrown out the window, and that amount of passion is all to such a degree, everything else out with that, it suddenly doesn't have any meaning or any worth or any value, because women have such a degree of that passionate intensity of what they do. Continuing on, whom does woman hate most? Thus spoke the iron to the magnet. I hate you most, because you attract me, but are not strong enough to draw me towards you. The man's happiness is I will. The woman's happiness is he will. Behold, now the world has become perfect. Thus thinks every woman when she obeys with all her love. And woman has to obey and find a depth for her surface. Woman's nature is surface, a changeable stormy film upon shallow waters. But a man's nature is deep, its torrent roars in subterranean caves. Woman senses its power, but does not comprehend it. Then the little old lady answered me, Zarathustra has said many nice things, especially for those who are young enough for them. It is strange Zarathustra knows little of women, and yet he is right about them. Is this because with women nothing is impossible? And now accepts, as thanks, a little truth. I am certainly old enough for it. Wrap it up and stop its mouth, otherwise it would cry too loudly, this little truth. Give me your little truth, woman, I said. And thus spoke the little old woman. Are you visiting women? Don't forget your whip. Thus spoke Zarathustra. So immediately we have that line of man's happiness is I will, the woman's happiness is he will. And so we have really to say, well, come on, Nietzsche. How can anybody possibly be happy in a completely submissive relationship like that, in which there's not that mutually shared passion and mutually shared interchangeability? Is even what he says in the previous section of The Friend. But of course what he said in that previous section doesn't apply to women, which then of course we say, rubbish. Because equally we can come back to this section and say, well, a great person, man or woman, will equally be that fantastic person which will open your views up, beliefs up, allow you to change your own opinions, change your own viewpoints about things, and you to have a positive effect upon what they say. Great sort of intertwining of your opinions, and then also having your differences as well. And not to have that completely submissive relationship. My happiness shouldn't be completely by adopting somebody else's views verbatim, completely just obeying whatever somebody else says. How can that possibly make me happy? So that's a good way in which we can start to automatically be critical of that line of woman's happiness is he will. Complete rubbish. And again we have that sense of women are just purely surface, in a sense of completely interested just solely in their beauty and the everyday goings on about things, and have no depth to them. In the sense of, you're not going to have a great discussion with a woman, they're not going to add to your intellect whatsoever, they're not going to be able to change your values or your views whatsoever, because all what they're going to be doing is just solely focused upon getting their hair done, putting their makeup on, looking fantastic. And again, you can take Nietzsche to task on this. Is it solely the purpose of a woman just to be beautiful? No. Are all women just solely surface? No. And of course you can go into those fantastic examples throughout the entire history in which you have incredible female figures in various different aspects of life and professions, all doing amazing things. Are those women purely just surface? No. And a great example of an inspirational woman in history is Mary Wollstonecraft, who wrote A Vindication of Women's Rights in 1792, which is considered to be one of the earliest examples of feminist philosophy. And Mary Wollstonecraft's also mother, famously, of Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, which is another great, fantastic example of inspirational women in history. Are those women just solely surface? No. They also have an incredible amount of depth to them, incredible amount of intellect. As he says here, there's a whole depth in torrential roars and subterranean caves. Equally to women, not just men. And then we have that last line as well. Are you visiting women? Don't forget your whip, in the sense of they're so unruly, they're so disobedient. You need to bring a whip to bring them all back into line. Which again, can you say that about men? Absolutely. When a man are completely unruly, completely all over the place, perfect example of that is when men watch sports. When men watch sports, they go completely irrational, completely passionate about wanting their team to win. But equally, would it be great if somebody stood there with a whip to say, whoosh, calm down, boys, calm down? Absolutely. It would be great in those given instances where people just get a bit too much into it, just to have that moment to say, just calm down a minute. It's not completely the end of the world if the team wins or not. So again, that last line there doesn't just apply just to women, also applies to men as well. So a great film to illustrate this section I thought was Pretty Woman from 1990, starring Julia Roberts and Richard Gere, in which we have a wee short summary of the plot from imdb.com. A man in a legal but hurtful business needs an escort for some social events and hires a beautiful prostitute he meets, only to fall in love. So we have the whole sense of Richard Gere's character picks up Julia Roberts' character, who is a prostitute in the film, to then make himself look good as well in these social events by having this beautiful woman there as he's having these expensive, luxurious dinners and so forth at 5-star restaurants with these business contacts. And then also, once he's done having these meetings and so forth, what does he get to do? He gets to have sex with her as well, and then has a whole contract with her and pays her, I can't remember exactly what the amount is, but it's quite a little bit of money as well, so she can stay over the weekend and he can basically have sex with her whenever he wants, and he can also use her for his social events at the same time. And we have a great wee section from the website globalcitizen.org about the movie. It's written by Danielle Salby. And this is what it says in the article here. Actress Daryl Hannah famously turned down the starring role, which was ultimately assumed by Julia Roberts, calling the movie a story about a prostitute who becomes a lady by being kept by a rich and powerful man disguised as a romantic fairy tale. And that's pretty much what it is. Roberts is charming and magnetic, and her performance engaging enough to distract from a storyline that is less than favourable towards women. One where a rough around the edges prostitute is polished and transformed into a real lady. While there are moments when her character Vivian shows strength and demands to be treated as an equal, as a whole, the film is not kind to women. I think that film is degrading for the whole of womankind, Hannah said. So, as well in the film, not only is he using her to make himself look good as well, and use her for sex, there's a sense of he falls in love with her as an individual, and then she conforms to his expectations of her as well. So she gets rid of her own individuality and so forth, and it all starts to get dripped through into becoming more bourgeois in a way, more elitist, or whatever you want to call it is the word, in the sense of away from her prostitute style of life into the high-flying life where she moves into then getting designer clothes and making herself look good in that way through luxurious designer items and gets a taste for that lifestyle quite clearly in the movie as well. But what's happening here is that she's losing her own identity, losing who she is as a person, and on a sort of unconscious level starting to seep into the high-flying, luxurious lifestyle that he has, and she sort of becomes like the good little woman in a way. It's a horrible turn of phrase, I know, but it's in that sense of wanting to become the good submissive wife to him, or good submissive woman to him. And it's exactly what it has in the Nietzsche there. There's not the sort of that going back and forth as well. It's sort of giving you a lifestyle choice to say, this is what you can have. If only you obey what I say. Here's my credit card, money, go buy yourself some things. And then, obviously Julia Roberts loves all that, of course. And then she ultimately just gets sucked into the whole power of him as a character. So initially, what seems a really lovely movie of a man rescuing a prostitute from the streets and so forth has that really dark undertone of a woman losing her own identity and conforming and obeying to what a man expects of her, the dark undercurrent of that film. And a great contrast to Pretty Woman is the movie Legally Blonde from 2001, starring Reese Witherspoon. And here's a wee quick summary of the plot from imdb.com again. Elle Woods, a fashionable sorority queen, is dumped by her boyfriend. She decides to follow him to law school. While she's there, she figures out that there is more to her than just her looks. And so we have that great contrast in Legally Blonde, criticizing precisely that line from Nietzsche that woman is just all surface, there is no depth. Quite the contrast entirely here, whilst is not the case in Pretty Woman, because Pretty Woman, she's a pretty woman. What are you going to do in Pretty Woman? Keep her pretty. So there's a great wee section as well from Global Citizen again, with the same article. In Legally Blonde, Elle Woods is a bubbly sorority girl who totally upholds the dumb blonde and boy crazy stereotype, until she turns around and completely shatters that stereotype. After her boyfriend deems her not serious enough and breaks up with her, she decides to follow him to Harvard Law School to win him back. She not only gets in, but rises to the top of her class and surprises even herself with her capabilities. She simply refuses to be put in any box or adhere to stereotypes. What begins like a typical rom-com turns the genre on its head, focusing instead on Elle's evolution and the realization of her potential. And I think that's a great way in which we can be critical of Nietzsche here, that he kind of puts women in a box in a way to say, well, they're only focused on the surface, they're only good for making babies, they're most happy when they're obeying men. No, absolutely not. And what's great about Legally Blonde as well, completely shattering all those stereotypes as well. She doesn't need a man to make her happy, quite the opposite. He's broke her heart. She wants to pursue a career and then has, through her own will and own volition, managed to have complete success in what she wants to do in a profession of being a lawyer in the film. And again, just showing that you can't put someone in a box. You can't stereotype them. You can't generalize them. You can't generalize an individual. You can't generalize a gender. Everybody is their own unique individual, and everybody has the right to completely break out and criticize any stereotypes that's placed upon them in the first place. Many thanks for listening to the episode. I hope you enjoyed my discussion of the sections in Nietzsche's Zarathustra of the way of the creator and of old and young women. Feel free to drop me an email at my address, dissectingphilosophy@gmail.com, and I can be also found on Twitter at I am a rubberman. Many thanks for listening, and I'll hope you'll join me next time.